This morning with hearts and minds full of things, full of our to-do lists, full of the plans for the day, full of worries on our hearts. And we offer those up to you. And we lay them at your feet, and we ask that you silence those voices for just a moment, that you allow us to hear the words which you speak to us, and that you would fill us up and send us out. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord, our God. Amen. So this morning we've moved on to chapter 6 of the Sermon on the Mount, and it's probably a good time to remind ourselves that there are no chapter and verses in the original Greek manuscript. Matthew would not have seen chapter 6 as like a whole new thing. You know, like you read a book and you go to bed at night and then you wake up and you have to remember what happened in the last chapter. That would not have been the case. They would have read this book straight through. These divisions were added later on. They were added by a monk in France, and they had to do with the number of verses he could fit on a page when he was illustrating the Bible. And so these chapter divisions are a little bit arbitrary. Not totally arbitrary, but a little bit. And so it's important for us to remember that 5 flows into 6. It's not a whole new idea that we're living with. And so the ideas that we left last week, the idea of God, of Jesus saying the most important things that we can do is to love self, love our neighbor, love God, continues on in today's practice. This is Jesus saying, if you're going to do these things, if you're going to love self, if you're going to love neighbor, if you're going to love God, this is what it looks like. This is the practice of Christianity. And he lists 3 pretty simple things, they're simple words anyway, on the practice of faith. The first is, prong number 1, is you need to give money to the poor. Money. He's not talking about like doing good deeds. It's literally, the word is literally almsgiving, which is to give money to. And so the first thing is to give money to the poor. The second is to pray. And the last thing is to fast. So if you're, I know, I made that face too, right? So if you're going to be a Christian, the 3 things you have to do is give money to the poor, give money to God and to the poor, pray, and to fast. Those are it. That's it. That's all Jesus lists as the expectations for a Christian. Now, we Presbyterians really like to think that it's really important about how you think with your brain, that filling your brain up with knowledge and things, which is important, don't get me wrong, is the essence of faith. But that's not what Jesus is saying here at all. Jesus is not concerned necessarily about right doctrine so much as right practice. What are you doing with your body? What are you doing with your time? What are you doing with your treasure? So I want to look at these 3 practices in a little bit more depth. The first one is almsgiving. Now, almsgiving has been a central staple of Christianity since the very beginning of the church. In Acts chapter 2, what we see is a church that gathers together, a community that gathers together, and everyone brought what they had. Everybody brought whatever they had. So if you were rich, you brought all the things you had, but if you were poor, you brought whatever you had too. And they put it in a big pile together on the table, and everybody took as they had need. This was the first practice of the church. Everyone shared, and nobody took more than they needed. We also see in Acts an early church where we have Stephen and Barnabas who are running around Jerusalem caring for the poor and the widowed, giving them food. They're taking money that the church has donated. People have come to the church and donated their alms, and Stephen and Barnabas go out into the community and they take care of the poor and the widow and the outcast. It's what led to Stephen getting stoned eventually, because it was overturning the established order of the community. And I imagine Matthew's church community must have functioned in pretty much the same way. Each person brought money into the community, into the central collection of the church, and Matthew, who was a tax collector, I'm sure diligently distributed it to those who had need. And if you've ever been to Europe or to churches that are closely tied to Europe, the first thing you'll see when you walk in the door, right beside the door, is an almsgiving box. And a lot of them are metal, so you can actually hear, like when people drop, if you go to these cathedrals, people will, as they come in, drop money into the alms box, and it will ring throughout the cathedral. like a bell, which is a friendly reminder to give early and give often, right? John really likes to hear the ding of the offering plate, so, right? Every time you went to church, this was not just like a Sunday morning thing. This was literally like if you came to the church for a meeting, you were expected to put a coin in the alms box, right? Maybe we should charge people to get out of meetings. That would be a good fundraiser, right? And so this is also, side note, because I'm a history buff, this is the origin of Boxing Day. Have you ever wondered on your calendar where it says Boxing Day? They would take the alms box out of the church and go out into the neighborhood and, like Scrooge, give money to the poor. So you celebrated on Christmas and got your gifts, and the next day you went and took the alms to the poor. Prong number 2 is prayer. And we're going to spend time talking about the middle verses of chapter 6, the Lord's Prayer, in detail. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on prayer, but prayer is the most central aspect of Christian faith. You cannot be a Christian and not pray. It's not possible. I mean, you could try. You can try to do it, but that would be like running a marathon without eating before you do it, right? Or hiking in the desert without a water bottle. You cannot be a Christian without praying. And I have not actually counted, but I'm going to estimate that Jesus expends probably 300% of his time in the gospel praying, right? Every 2 seconds, Jesus is turning around and praying. He's going off into a boat and praying. He's going off up on the mountain and praying. He's going into a garden and praying. He's shutting himself in a room and praying. Jesus prays constantly. And you cannot have a strong faith without prayer. It's the wind, it's the water, it's the fire, it's the food. It's what keeps us sustained and going together. It's the lifeblood of faith. And prong number 3 is fasting. And all of you were with me until I said that one, right? We don't fast. Americans don't do that. Fasting is a countercultural idea in our society. In fact, if somebody tells you they're fasting, you look at them like, have you ever had anybody be like, I'm getting blood work in the morning, and the first question is always, is it fasting? Right? Like, we don't want to go from dinner to breakfast without eating, right? And Jesus tells us that some of us don't eat breakfast, but still, I mean, like, really. We don't want to go like that long without eating, but Jesus tells these people not to fast so long that other people start to notice. Not to go so long that it becomes a stunt. And the act of fasting does not have to be with food, right? You can fast from anything. You can fast from anything, right? The key to fasting is that it requires sacrifice. So giving up checking your email for the weekend when you hate checking your email is not a fast. That is a gift to yourself and maybe self-care, but that's not a fast, right? Fasting would be something like giving up pop, soda, if that is your favorite beverage, right? One Lent, my husband tried to give up caffeine. We were in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is very Catholic, and so everybody else was giving something up, so we were like, we should give something up too, right? Jeremy tried to give up caffeine, so he switched to root beer. Did you know root beer had caffeine in it? Yeah, it was the intention that counted, right? The key to fasting is to not tell everybody you're fasting. It should be self-sacrificial. It should be something that you're giving up, but it also should not be something that you're using to show people how cool it is that you can go without something. It's like, have you ever met a vegan? You know within 3 minutes of meeting them that they're a vegan, right? Or somebody on the keto diet. I'm sorry, I don't eat sugar anymore. I'm on the keto diet, right? We have all these things that we like to brag about that are sacrificial, right? That's not fasting. The point of fasting is for you to go without something, so every time you think about it, you remember that you're doing something for God. And also, chocolate cake tastes really good if you've given up sugar for 40 days. Pro tip. Right? But Jesus throws a wrench into all of this. He says, these are the three things that you should do. These are the 3 tasks, and you're supposed to do it quietly and humbly. And so when you give alms, it should be in secret, and when you pray, it should be in private, and when you fast, you do it so other people don't notice. But 5 minutes ago, and not even 1 chapter ago, Jesus tells us that we are the light of the world and the salt of the earth and a city on a hill. And we're supposed to spread the gospel and tell people about Jesus. And so how do you go from don't do anything so anybody notices to make sure everybody notices, right? It's a good thing that preachers and sermons never contradict themselves, right? They're always consistent and perfect. And so what it is the same thing Jesus was talking about in chapter 5. It's our intention. It's our purpose. Why are we doing these things? Are we doing them so everybody can notice how cool we are? Are we doing it so everybody can see how good of a Christian we are, how much better we are at being a Christian than they are? Why is the purpose for these acts? Many, many things in the Christian life are not absolutes. There's no guideline. There's no rule I can say, now you've tipped over the line to being too self-aggrandizing, to whatever. And this is a gray area situation. Presbyterians tend to be too humble. We tend to be too secret. We do good deeds, and our cousin doesn't even know we've done them. We do good deeds, and our husband sometimes is like, hey, why did we give $20 to somebody on... Not that that's happened in our house. Hey, I noticed you supported somebody for $20 on Kickstarter. What did we donate to, right? Like, that may be too secret. Presbyterians could get out into the world and tell people a little bit about how cool we are, how different we are, how unique we are, what we do that's different. We could talk and brag about ourselves a little more. But there are loads of other churches where bragging about themselves is not an issue. There are loads of other churches where I think they've gone over the line. And I'll give you an example. I was listening to a podcast about the state of the evangelical church. It's one of those podcasts I listen to that covers the breadth of the culture of the church and what's going on in the world. And they were talking about a church that was offering their members a money-back guarantee. Literally, a money-back guarantee. Here's what they did. They said, and this isn't a bad idea, they said they have a 90-day tithing challenge. 90 days. So you tell the church how much you're going to tithe. Tithe is always how much of your income. 10%, right? Does anybody know what the average giving rate of American Christian is? Off the top of your head?
I'm guessing
2 to 3% of your income, right? That's the general, over the average, right? So they're asking you, this is a big step. 10% is a big step of your income, no matter what your income is. They said that if you give the full 10% for 90 days, and anybody can sacrifice for 90 days, and you are supposed to sacrifice and give, right? That the church was offering you a money-back guarantee on your tithes. They said that if you do this for 90 days, they promise that God will bless you, right? They promise God will bless you in a material way, that in 90 days you will see God's presence and blessing in your life. And if you don't, you're allowed to call the church and say, I didn't get blessed for 90 days. Can I have my tithes back, please? Yeah. And they have 4,000 members, this church, right? This is not the gospel of Jesus Christ. Nowhere in the gospel does it promise you blessings of any kind. I've read it many times, right? Jesus nowhere in the gospel says, if you donate to the poor, I promise I'm going to give you twice as much back. Nowhere does it say that. In fact, Jesus says that you're supposed to go out and not ask for anything. He sends the 70 disciples out and says, go, spread the good news of the gospel, serve the poor, and don't expect anything in return, not a thing. And yet for so long, the church, the dominant narrative of the church has been this one, that if you believe in God, God will promise you in your life, bless you, and your life is going to be fine, and you're going to be good. And we let them have that narrative. We have vacated the space. And we have let people say that this is who God is. But you and I both know that's not how God works. We all know that's not how God works. And you know what happens is the people who are told that and believe that and think that that's the way faith works, that if you do good works, if you do the things you're supposed to do, tithing and praying and fasting, if you do those things, you're going to get some sort of benefit, material benefit out of it. Their faith is so fragile. That's a fragile faith. I can't tell you the number of times I sat in an emergency room with somebody who couldn't understand why God hated them so much. I didn't do anything wrong. Why does God hate me? I did what I was supposed to do. I gave money to the church. I prayed. I fasted. Why is God giving me this? And we let that narrative be the only voice people hear so often. We let the Christian communication into the world be about money and about power and about position because we are not doing the things that we need to do in a way that other people can see. And I'm not saying we need to take out a billboard and tell everybody how cool we are, but I am saying that when you do something for God, when you're helping someone else for God, it's okay to do faith things with them too. When you give somebody, a homeless person, money on the side of the street, maybe take 10 seconds and pray with them too. Maybe when you hear somebody talking about that kind of a God, the kind of God that doesn't ever show up in Scripture, the angry God, the mean God, the judgmental God, maybe instead of just letting that go, you can say, I know a different God. The call to be humble, the call to be private, the call to do these things is not about not telling people or being silent or doing them in secret. What it is about is doing it in humbleness and remembering that it is God doing it through you. But it's still a call to do it. It's still a call to show up. And it's still a call to not let the only narrative about God be one that is destructive. And it makes me wonder if we shouldn't be looking at the witness of the global church more often. I looked it up today. There are more Presbyterians in the country of Ghana than there are in the United States. There are more Presbyterians in the country of South Korea than there are in the United States. There are more Presbyterians in the global South in Latin America than there is in the United States, and I wonder if that's not because they're service first. And they're not letting the dominative narrative that we've allowed to happen be the only witness to Jesus. And so our challenge together, our challenge as a community, is to speak out against those things that destroy the gospel, that hide the gospel under a bushel, and make it hard for people to meet the God that we know, the one who is service first, the one who asks us to pray, and the one who fasts. And we can do that. It just takes a little bravery, a little courage, and a little bit of getting up. And maybe not being quite